Echoes in a hollow room. The cursor blinked, a patient, rhythmic heartbeat on the otherwise blank expanse of page 312. Elara Vance watched it, her own breath held in unconscious sympathy. Finis. The word, typed with a quiet finality, seemed too small for the universe of unspoken grief, fractured vows, and lingering silences she had painstakingly transcribed from the hollows of her own heart onto the digital page. Echoes in a Hollow Room, her play, was complete. Outside her study window, the Audenburg sky wept a typically melancholic November drizzle. The skeletal branches of the old oak in their small city garden clawed at the gray canvas, each drop a tiny percussion against the glass, a counterpoint to the muted hum of the city beyond. It was a soundtrack Elara had grown accustomed to, one that often seeped into the mood of her writing. Today, however, the city's sorrow felt less like inspiration and more like a shared commiseration. She leaned back in her worn velvet chair, a relic from her grandmother's house, its faded floral pattern a testament to endurance. Her own endurance felt considerably more frayed. At 38, Elara had once been a playwright of modest, promising acclaim. Then came Liam. Marriage, the comfortable rhythm of a shared life that had over a decade slowly lulled her creative voice into a whisper, then a silence. It wasn't a malicious silencing, not on Liam's part. He was, or had been, proud of her early successes. But life, in its relentless accumulation of days, had simply filled the spaces where the stories used to breathe. Until now. This play had clawed its way out of her, an urgent, almost desperate resurgence. It was the story of Clara and Ben, a couple navigating the treacherous landscape of a dying marriage, a landscape Elara recognized with a chilling intimacy. The disconnect, the carefully constructed pleasantries papering over chasms of unspoken resentment, the way love could curdle into a weary, resentful obligation. She had poured it all into Clara and Ben, dissecting her own marriage under the guise of fiction. A sigh escaped her, thin and reedy. She hadn't told Liam about Echoes. Not in detail. He knew she was writing again, of course. He'd made the appropriately supportive noises. "That's great, Elle. Glad you're getting back to it." Usually while scrolling through architectural blueprints on his tablet, or already halfway out the door. His work as an architect had become increasingly demanding, or so he said. Late nights at the firm, site visits that stretched into weekends, a growing preoccupation that left him present in body but absent in spirit. The silence in their brownstone apartment, once a comfortable shared space, now often felt cavernous, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall amplifying the emptiness. It was in those silences, during those long evenings when Liam's side of the bed remained cold for hours, that Echoes in a Hollow Room had truly taken root. She saved the manuscript one last time, a small, almost reverent click of the mouse. A shiver, not entirely from the damp chill seeping in from the window, traced its way down her spine. There was a terrifying vulnerability in these pages. It was as if she had flayed herself open and pinned her soul to the paper for inspection. The sharp, cheerful trill of her phone cut through the quiet. "Chloe? Done?" Her friend's voice, vibrant and warm, crackled through the speaker. Elara managed a small smile. Done. 312 pages of marital bliss gone wrong. Or 312 pages of raw, unadulterated genius that's going to set the theater world on fire, Chloe corrected, her optimism a familiar, welcome balm. "You're sending it to Julian Croft today, right? Don't chicken out." Julian Croft was the artistic director of the Chamberlain Theater, Audenburg's most prestigious independent venue. He'd championed Elara's work years ago, before her hiatus. Sending him this particular play felt like laying her most fragile secret at his feet. "I will," Elara promised, her voice firmer than she felt. "Though I suspect he'll find it a bit bleak. Bleak is good. Bleak is honest," Chloe said. "Besides, you're Elara Vance. Your bleak is another person's profound." After the call, Elara printed a copy of the manuscript. The printer whirred, spitting out page after page of her carefully chosen words that felt heavier in her hands than they had on the screen. She packaged it meticulously, addressing it to Julian. The act felt like launching a message in a bottle into a vast, indifferent ocean. Later that evening, Liam came home. The familiar click of his keys in the lock, the thud of his briefcase on the polished wood floor of the hallway, sounds that once signaled comfort, now merely marked a transition in the day's prevailing quiet. He found her in the living room, curled on the sofa, a book unread in her lap. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering gas fire. "Hey," he said, loosening his tie. He looked tired. Lines of strain bracketed his mouth, lines she hadn't noticed a year ago, or perhaps had chosen not to see. "Rough day?" she asked, the question automatic, a well-worn groove in their conversational track. The usual, client meetings, endless revisions. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that used to be boyishly endearing but now seemed only weary. He didn't elaborate. He rarely did anymore. He pecked her on the cheek, a fleeting, cool contact. "What about you? Good day writing?" "Productive," she said, the word feeling inadequate. "I finished the play." "Oh, great." He smiled, a brief, surface-level expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's really great, Elle. We should celebrate." But he was already moving towards the kitchen, presumably in search of a beer or a distraction. The offer of celebration hung in the air, as insubstantial as smoke. Elara watched his retreating back, a familiar ache constricting her chest. The hollow room of her play felt less like fiction and more like the very air she was breathing. She hadn't mentioned sending it to the Chamberlain. It felt like too much, too real, to share with him just then. The distance between them was a fragile thing. She feared that too much truth, too suddenly, might shatter it completely, leaving them stranded on opposite shores of an unbridgeable silence. 2 weeks later, an email landed in Elara's inbox with the understated subject line, "Regarding your manuscript, Chamberlain Theatre." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. With trembling fingers, she clicked it open. Julian Croft's words were concise, professional, yet carried an undercurrent of excitement that made Elara's breath catch. He loved Echoes in a Hollow Room. He found it unflinchingly honest, powerfully resonant, and a work that demands to be staged. The Chamberlain wanted to option it for their spring season. Elara read the email 3 times, the words blurring, reforming, finally sinking in. A dizzying wave of emotion washed over her. Elation, terror, disbelief, and a profound, aching validation. Someone had heard her. Someone understood the silent screams embedded in her script. She wanted to tell Liam, to share this monumental news. But when he came home that evening, the now familiar wariness clung to him like a shroud. He was on his phone, a hushed, intense conversation that ended abruptly when he saw her. "Big news," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Oh?" He pocketed his phone, his expression guarded. "What's up?" "The Chamberlain, Julian Croft. They want to produce my play." For a moment his face registered genuine surprise, a flicker of the man she used to know. "Seriously? Elle, that's incredible. The Chamberlain? Wow." He even managed a smile that reached his eyes, a rare sighting these days. "My wife, the famous playwright." A warmth spread through Elara, a fragile hope. Perhaps this could be a bridge. Perhaps her success could rekindle something. "It's just an option for now, but it's a big step," she said, trying to temper her own excitement. "It's fantastic," he said, pulling her into a brief, somewhat stiff hug. "You deserve it. You've worked so hard." But then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down, his smile faltering, replaced by that familiar, shuttered look. "Sorry, gotta take this. Work thing. Urgent." He stepped out onto the small balcony, his voice a low murmur against the city sounds. The warmth in Elara's chest cooled, the fragile hope receding. The work thing seemed to be a constant, an ever-present third party in their marriage. The play, her triumph, felt suddenly diminished, relegated to a brief interlude before the more pressing demands of his increasingly mysterious professional life. The pre-production phase began in a whirlwind. Meetings with Julian, discussions about set design, casting calls. Elara, still using her maiden name Elara Marin for her writing, a habit from before her marriage that she'd never bothered to change, found herself re-energized, albeit with a persistent knot of anxiety in her stomach. The play was so personal, so raw. To see it brought to life by strangers felt like allowing them to read her diary, to dissect her soul. Casting for Clara, the female lead, was crucial. Clara was the emotional core of the play, a woman unraveling as her marriage disintegrated, her dialogue laced with Elara's own carefully articulated pain. Julian had a few actresses in mind. Elara sat in the darkened auditorium of the Chamberlain during auditions, a silent observer. One after another, talented women read Clara's lines. Some with anger, some with a brittle fragility, some with a weary resignation. None quite captured the precise blend of vulnerability and simmering strength Elara had envisioned. Then Serafina Bellwether walked onto the stage. She was younger than Elara, perhaps early 30s, with a cascade of dark, wavy hair, expressive eyes, and a captivating stage presence that filled even the empty theater. There was an intensity about her, a fierce commitment in her gaze. She read a scene where Clara confronts Ben about his emotional absence, a scene Elara had written late one night, tears blurring her vision. after another lonely dinner and another lame excuse from Liam. Serafina didn't just recite the lines, she inhabited them. Her voice, rich and resonant, trembled with a nuanced sorrow that sent shivers down Elara's spine. It was as if Serafina had somehow tapped directly into Elara's own vein of grief. "Your silence," Serafina delivered, her eyes fixed on an imaginary Ben. "It's not empty, is it? It's full. Full of all the things you can't say to me. Full of her." The last word, her, was a whisper, a shard of glass. Elara felt a jolt, a strange, visceral reaction. The line, of course, was hers, but Serafina's delivery made it feel freshly, horribly real. Julian, beside her, made a quiet sound of approval. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" he murmured. Elara could only nod, a lump forming in her throat. Remarkable, yes, and unsettlingly familiar. There was something in Serafina's raw portrayal that felt like looking into a distorted mirror. Serafina Bellwether was cast as Clara. Liam, meanwhile, continued his pattern of late nights and distracted weekends. He'd ask about the play occasionally, generic questions that Elara answered with equally generic replies. She hadn't told him the name of the actress playing the lead. It didn't seem relevant. His interest felt superficial, a polite nod to her world before he retreated back into his own. One Saturday, Elara was tidying Liam's perpetually messy desk in their shared home office, a task she performed more out of habit than desire. Tucked beneath a pile of architectural journals, she found a small, embossed theater ticket. Not for the Chamberlain, but for the Auden, a smaller, trendier venue across town. The date was from 2 weeks prior, a night Liam had claimed to be working late on a crucial deadline. A cold dread pooled in her stomach. It was probably nothing. He could have gone with a colleague, a client. But he hadn't mentioned it, and he'd lied about working. She tucked the ticket away, the glossy paper feeling like a brand against her skin. The first small, sharp crack in the carefully constructed facade of her denial. The echoes in her hollow room were growing louder. Rehearsals for Echoes in a Hollow Room began in earnest in a stark, dusty room at the back of the Chamberlain. The scent of old wood, stale coffee, and the nervous energy of creation filled the air. Elara attended sporadically at Julian's invitation. She found it both exhilarating and excruciating to watch her words take shape, to hear her deepest anxieties voiced by actors struggling to find their emotional truth. Serafina Bellwether threw herself into the role of Clara with a ferocious dedication. She peppered Julian with questions, scribbled copious notes in her script, and experimented with different emotional registers. Elara watched her, a knot of complex feelings tightening in her chest. Admiration for Serafina's talent, gratitude for her commitment, and a persistent, unnameable unease. Sometimes, during a particularly poignant scene, Serafina's eyes would find Elara's in the dimness of the rehearsal room, a silent question in their depths, as if seeking validation or a deeper understanding of pain. Elara would offer a small encouraging nod, her own heart aching with the unspoken truth that Clara's pain was, in so many ways, her own. Liam's absences became more frequent, his explanations more vague. Networking event, client dinner, site emergency. The excuses piled up like unread newspapers, each one adding to the growing mountain of Elara's suspicion. She noticed him guarding his phone more closely, angling it away when texts came in, taking calls in another room. The intimacy they once shared had eroded into a landscape of polite evasions and carefully maintained distances. One blustery afternoon, Elara was walking near Audenburg's riverfront, trying to clear her head after a particularly draining rehearsal. The play was consuming her, its themes bleeding into her reality, or perhaps her reality was simply providing more fodder for the play's insatiable appetite for emotional truth. She found herself revising lines in her head, sharpening Clara's accusations, deepening her sorrow, as if by perfecting the art, she could somehow control the chaos in her life. As she rounded a corner, she saw a couple emerging from a small, independent art cinema, a place known for showing obscure foreign films. They were laughing, heads close together. The woman's dark, wavy hair caught the weak afternoon sun. Serafina. And the man beside her, his arm casually brushing hers, his profile achingly familiar, was Liam. Elara froze, her blood turning to ice water. It was a public street, a chance encounter. They hadn't seen her. They looked happy, intimate. Liam's smile was easy, unforced, the kind she hadn't seen directed at her in months, perhaps years. She ducked into a nearby bookstore, her heart pounding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It could be innocent, a chance meeting, a shared interest in esoteric cinema. But the way he looked at Serafina, the comfortable ease between them, It screamed of something more. The theater ticket she'd found, the late nights, the guarded phone. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening, undeniable precision. Serafina Bellwether, the actress playing Clara, the actress playing her. The irony was so grotesque, so cruelly theatrical, that Elara felt a hysterical laugh bubble up, which she quickly choked back. Her play, her confessional, her raw exposure of a dying marriage, was being enacted not just on stage, but in her own life, with her own husband as a lead actor in a drama she hadn't written, but was undeniably starring in. She stumbled home, the city streets a blur. The brownstone apartment felt cold, alien. She walked through the rooms, touching familiar objects. A photograph of her and Liam, smiling on a beach holiday years ago, a small sculpture he'd given her, and they felt like relics from a distant, irretrievable past. The hollow room was no longer just a metaphor. It was her reality, and the echoes were deafening. That evening, Liam came home humming, a lightness in his step she hadn't witnessed in a long time. He even brought her flowers, a small bouquet of freesias, her favorite. "What's this for?" she asked, her voice flat, devoid of the surprise or pleasure he might have expected. "Just because," he said, attempting a charming smile. "Had a good day. Closed a big project." The lie was so blatant, so effortless, it took her breath away. He hadn't been at work. He'd been with Serafina. The flowers felt like an insult, a cheap prop in his elaborate deception. She placed them in a vase, her hands trembling. She wanted to scream, to confront him, to shatter the fragile facade of their life. But the words wouldn't come. What could she say? "I saw you with the woman who was playing me in a play about us?" It sounded insane, even to her own ears. Instead, a chilling calm settled over her. She watched him move about the kitchen, making dinner, oblivious to the storm raging inside her. He was a stranger, a very good actor, playing the role of a devoted husband, just as Serafina was playing the role of a betrayed wife. And Elara, the playwright, was trapped in the audience of her own tragedy. The next day, at rehearsal, Elara watched Serafina with new eyes. Every gesture, every intonation, every flicker of emotion in her portrayal of Clara now carried a double, torturous meaning. When Serafina spoke lines about betrayal, about the slow, agonizing death of trust, Elara felt the words like a physical blow. During a break, Serafina approached her, a script in hand. "Elara," she began, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This monologue in Act 2, where Clara talks about feeling invisible, it's so powerful, so raw. What was she feeling, truly? What's the core of that invisibility?" Elara looked at Serafina, at this woman who was, unknowingly, dissecting Elara's own pain, while simultaneously being a cause of it. The urge to scream, to accuse, to expose the whole hideous charade was almost overwhelming. But she met Serafina's earnest, searching gaze and saw not a villain, but an actress dedicated to her craft, an actress trying to understand a character. An actress who was perhaps as much a pawn in Liam's game as Elara herself, or perhaps not. Elara couldn't know. The not knowing was another layer of the torment. "She feels," Elara said, her voice quiet, carefully controlled, "like a ghost in her own life. Like the person she loves looks right through her, seeing someone else. Or perhaps no one at all." Serafina nodded slowly, her eyes wide with understanding. Yes, I feel that. It's devastating." She scribbled a note in her script. "Thank you. That helps immensely." Elara watched her walk away, the irony a bitter taste in her mouth. She was helping Serafina portray her own heartbreak, a heartbreak intensified by Serafina's unwitting role in it. The theater, once her sanctuary, had become a place of exquisite torture. Her art was consuming her life, and her life was a grotesque parody of her art. The weeks leading up to opening night passed in a blur of heightened anxiety and surreal detachment for Elara. She moved through her days like an automaton, her mind a constant battlefield of conflicting emotions. One part of her, the playwright, was meticulously fine-tuning scenes with Julian, ensuring every word, every pause, landed with maximum impact. The other part, the wife, was reeling from the ever-clearer picture of Liam's betrayal, a betrayal that was now inextricably, bizarrely linked to her creative work. She saw Liam and Serafina together again, a fleeting glimpse this time, sharing a coffee at a small cafe near the Chamberlain, their heads bent together in animated conversation. It was presented by Liam as a chance meeting with one of the actors from that play you like, a dismissive, almost careless lie that stung more than an elaborate fabrication would have. He still didn't connect Elara, the playwright who used her maiden name professionally, with echoes in a hollow room. Or if he did, he gave no sign, his self-absorption a fortress. Elara found herself retreating further into the world of echoes, her revisions becoming sharper, more brutal. Clara's pain became more palpable, her accusations more direct. It was a dangerous game, pouring her raw, unfolding agony onto the page, knowing it would be spoken aloud, witnessed. There was a recklessness to it, a sense that she had nothing left to lose. Julian, perceptive as ever, noticed the shift. "The new pages are incredibly potent, Elara," he said one afternoon, his brow furrowed as he read a revised scene. Almost uncomfortably so. "Are you all right?" Elara met his gaze, her own eyes shadowed. "I'm channeling, Julian," she said, a wry, humorless smile touching her lips. "Isn't that what writers do?" He held her gaze for a long moment, a deep, empathetic understanding in his eyes that made her want to weep. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. "Art should illuminate, not incinerate." Chloe was her only true confidant. Over hushed phone calls and tearful meetings in quiet corners of Audenburg cafes, Elara unburdened herself, the full, tangled story of Liam, Serafina, and the play. "The universe has a sick sense of humor," Chloe said, shaking her head in disbelief after Elara recounted seeing Liam and Serafina at the cinema. "He's having an affair with the woman playing you. In a play you wrote about him having an affair, or at least the emotional equivalent. It's diabolical." "I feel like I'm losing my mind, Chloe," Elara whispered, tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "Every rehearsal is torture. I watch her speak my words, feel my pain, and he's out there with her." "What are you gonna do?" Chloe asked gently. Elara shook her head. "I don't know. Part of me wants to burn it all down, confront them both, but then what? And the play, it's my lifeblood right now. It's the only thing that feels real, even though it's tearing me apart." "Opening night," Chloe said, her voice thoughtful. "He'll be there, won't he? To support her?" Elara nodded, a cold dread settling in. Serafina had mentioned inviting a special friend to the premiere. The pieces were aligning for a collision, whether Elara willed it or not. Opening night arrived like a judgment day. The Audenburg air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of impending winter. The Chamberlain Theatre buzzed with a nervous, electric energy. Elara felt strangely bifurcated. The anxious playwright, desperate for her work to be understood, and the betrayed wife, bracing for an inevitable, agonizing revelation. She dressed with care, choosing a simple, elegant black dress. It felt like armor. Chloe was her rock, her hand firm on Elara's arm as they navigated the throng of theatergoers in the lobby. Elara scanned the crowd, her heart hammering. She didn't see Liam. Not yet. Backstage, the atmosphere was a controlled chaos of last-minute adjustments and hushed encouragements. Julian gave Elara a brief, reassuring hug. "It's a powerful piece, Elara. Trust it. Trust them." She found a spot in the wings, her traditional post for opening nights, a place where she could feel the pulse of the performance without being seen. The house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience. The curtain rose. The first act unfolded with a gripping intensity. The set, a minimalist representation of Clara and Ben's stylish but sterile apartment, perfectly captured the hollow room of the title. The actors playing Ben and the supporting characters were excellent, but it was Serafina, as Clara, who held the stage. She was incandescent. Every line, every gesture resonated with a profound, aching truth. Elara watched, her own emotions a tangled mess of pride, pain, and a growing, unbearable suspense. She found herself scanning the shadowy audience during scene changes, searching for Liam's face. Then, during the interval, as the audience streamed out for refreshments, Elara saw him. He was standing near the orchestra pit, talking animatedly with Serafina, who was still in her Clara costume, her face flushed with a mixture of adrenaline and success. He hadn't seen Elara. He was looking at Serafina with an expression of undisguised admiration, a tenderness that made Elara's stomach clench. He reached out, briefly touched Serafina's arm, a gesture of intimacy that was like a knife to Elara's heart. Chloe appeared at her side, her expression grim. "Are you seeing this?" Elara nodded, numb. "He still has no idea, does he? That I wrote this." "Men," Chloe said, her voice with contempt. "They only see what they want to see." The bell chimed, signaling the end of the interval. Elara felt a wave of nausea. The second act contained the play's most devastating scenes, the monologues she had poured her deepest grief into. She returned to her spot in the wings, her body trembling. Liam and Serafina, she assumed, had returned to their seats. The play resumed. The tension on stage escalated, mirroring the turmoil within Elara. Serafina, as Clara, delivered a searing monologue about the loneliness of being unheard, unseen in her own marriage. Elara's words, her pain, filled the theater, raw and undeniable. Then came the scene. The one Elara both dreaded and, in a perverse way, craved. Clara confronts Ben directly, not with accusations, but with a soul-bearing honesty about the chasm between them, the ghost of another presence in their lives. Serafina stood center stage, bathed in a single, stark spotlight. The theater was utterly silent. "It's not just the late nights, Ben," she began, her voice trembling with controlled emotion. "It's not the meetings or the deadlines you never seem to meet. It's the silence when you come home. It's the way you look away when I try to meet your eyes. It's the hollowness where your heart used to be, where our heart used to be." Elara's eyes were fixed on Liam. He was sitting in the 5th row, center. She could see his profile clearly. He was leaning forward slightly, his attention riveted on Serafina. Serafina continued, her voice gaining strength, laced with a profound sorrow. "There's someone else, isn't there? Not necessarily in your bed, not yet maybe, but in your head, in your heart. Someone who makes you feel seen, someone who isn't me." As Serafina spoke these lines Elara had written in a tear-soaked notebook months ago, lines that echoed a silent conversation she'd had with Liam 1,000 times in her own mind. She saw Liam flinch. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but Elara saw it. His head dropped slightly. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Serafina's voice cracked, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Who is she, Ben? This woman who has stolen the echoes from our hollow room and left me with only the silence." At that moment, Liam slowly turned his head, not towards the stage, but towards Serafina. His expression was a complex tapestry of shock, discomfort, and something else. A dawning, horrified recognition? Or was it merely the discomfort of a man watching a play that hit too close to home, still oblivious to its true author? But then his eyes, for a fleeting second, flickered towards the wings, almost as if he sensed Elara's presence. A paranoid thought, perhaps. But in that instant, the air crackled. It wasn't a public explosion. It wasn't a dramatic revelation under a spotlight. It was a silent, internal detonation within Elara. The look on Liam's face, the discomfort, the slight furrow of his brow as he absorbed lines that must have felt eerily specific, lines delivered by the woman he was involved with, was her confirmation. He might not know she wrote it, not yet. But the truth of the play, its uncanny reflection of his own hidden life, was undeniable. And he was hearing it from Serafina. The scene ended. The lights faded on Serafina's anguished face. A beat of stunned silence, then the theater erupted in applause. Thunderous, sustained. For Serafina, for the play, for Elara's words. Elara felt nothing. The applause was a distant roar, the accolades for her art a cruel counterpoint to the wreckage of her life. She saw Liam rise with the rest of the audience clapping, his face a mask of polite appreciation, perhaps a little pale. He was looking at Serafina, who was taking her bows, radiant. The playwright in Elara registered the success. The woman, the wife, felt only a vast, chilling emptiness. The echoes in her hollow room had finally found their voice, and in doing so had confirmed her deepest fears. The stage had become the ultimate arbiter of her truth. The applause eventually subsided, leaving behind a charged silence in Elara's world. Backstage, the cast and crew were jubilant, caught in the euphoric aftermath of a successful opening night. Champagne corks popped, laughter and congratulations echoed through the narrow corridors. Julian found Elara, his face beaming. "They loved it, Elara. A triumph. You should be out there taking a bow." She managed a weak smile. Serafina was extraordinary. The words felt like ash in her mouth. She was. She understood Clara. You both did. Julian squeezed her arm, then was swept away by a tide of well-wishers. Chloe appeared, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you okay?" she mouthed, her voice barely audible above the din. Elara shook her head, a single tear escaping and tracing a cold path down her cheek. "I need to go home." She slipped out unnoticed, the sounds of celebration fading behind her. The Audenburg night air was sharp, biting. She walked, not towards her shared apartment with Liam, but aimlessly through the lamplit streets. The city's indifferent beauty, a stark contrast to the turmoil within her. The play's success felt like a distant, irrelevant event that had happened to someone else. What mattered was the chilling clarity of Liam's reaction, the confirmation of a betrayal so intricately woven with her own art that it felt like a cosmic joke. When she finally let herself into the apartment, hours later, it was silent. Liam wasn't home. Of course he wasn't. He would be celebrating with Serafina, the star of the show, his special friend. Elara walked through the rooms, each object a silent testament to a life that now felt like a meticulously crafted lie. She sat on the edge of their bed, the bed they hadn't truly shared in months, and a desolation unlike any she had ever known washed over her. It wasn't the fiery rage she might have expected, but a cold, hollow grief. The kind that settles deep in your bones and makes the world feel muted, colorless. She was still sitting there, cloaked in darkness, when Liam finally came in. He moved quietly, perhaps thinking she was asleep. He switched on a small lamp, and then he saw her. He started, a flicker of surprise, or was it guilt in his eyes? "Elara, you're up. I didn't see you at the theater party." "I wasn't there," she said, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. He hesitated, unbuttoning his shirt. "The play was something else, intense. That actress Serafina, she's incredible." He attempted a casual tone, but there was a new wariness in his posture. "Yes," Elara said, "she is." An awkward silence descended, thick and suffocating. Liam busied himself, avoiding her gaze. "It's a powerful script," he continued, almost to himself. "Some of those lines really hit home, made me think." Alara's heart gave a painful throb. "Made you think?" "Oh?" she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "About what, Liam?" He finally looked at her, a troubled expression on his face. "Just things, relationships, how people drift apart." He paused. "The writer, Vance, do we know them?" He used the slightly altered pen name she sometimes used for submissions to differentiate from her earlier, more known work. The moment had come. The carefully constructed walls of her silence, her avoidance, crumbled. "Her name is Elara Vance," she said, her voice low but clear, each word dropping like a stone into a deep well. "And yes, Liam, you know her, intimately." He stared at her, his brow furrowing in confusion, then slowly, dawning comprehension. His face paled. The air in the room seemed to crackle with unspoken accusations, with years of swallowed pain. You wrote that play?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "Clara? Ben? That was us?" Elara didn't answer. She simply met his gaze, her own eyes reflecting a depth of sorrow and betrayal that, finally, irrevocably, seemed to penetrate his self-absorption. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back, sinking onto the edge of a chair, his face ashen. "Oh my God, Elara, oh my God." The silence that followed was no longer the polite, evasive silence of their recent past. It was a shattering silence, filled with the wreckage of their marriage, with the undeniable truth of his deceit and her pain, all laid bare under the harsh glare of her own words, spoken by the woman he had chosen over her. "Serafina," Elara said, the name a cold, hard pebble in her mouth. "She plays Clara so well, doesn't she? Almost as if she has insider knowledge." Liam flinched as if struck. He couldn't meet her eyes. The fight, the denial, seemed to drain out of him, leaving behind a slumped, defeated figure. "Elara, I don't know what to say." His voice was barely a whisper. "There's nothing to say, is there, Liam?" Alara's voice was devoid of hysteria, filled instead with a chilling, weary finality. "You said it all. Or rather, I wrote it all, and you lived it. And she performed it." The grotesque symmetry of it was almost too much to bear. He looked up then, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never meant to hurt you." A dry, humorless laugh escaped Elara. "Didn't you? Or did you just not expect to get caught in such a theatrical way?" The confrontation wasn't the explosive, cathartic release she might have once imagined. There were no thrown objects, no raised voices, just the devastating weight of the truth, settling like dust over the ruins of their life together. The echoes in their hollow room had finally been named, and the sound was unbearable. Elara stood up, her legs feeling unsteady. "I think you should leave, Liam." He looked at her, his face a mask of anguish and dawning regret. "Elara, please." "There's nothing left to say tonight," she repeated, her voice firm, though a tremor ran through her. "Please, just go." He stared at her for a long moment, then with a slow, defeated nod, he rose and walked out of the bedroom, out of the apartment, out of her life, the click of the door echoing in the sudden, vast emptiness. Elara sank back onto the bed, the silence now truly deafening. The play was a success. Her marriage was over. The triumph and the tragedy were so inextricably intertwined, she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. She was the author of her own heartbreak, and the applause still rang faintly, mockingly in her ears. The days that followed were a blur of numbing practicalities and overwhelming emotional waves. Liam moved out, a swift, silent departure facilitated by a few terse phone calls and the help of his brother. Elara watched from the window as he carried boxes to his car, his shoulders slumped, his face averted. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no pleas for forgiveness, just the quiet, grim business of dismantling a life. The apartment, once merely feeling hollow, now echoed with a profound, tangible emptiness. Liam's absence was a physical presence, a void in every room. Elara found herself wandering through the spaces they had shared, touching his side of the closet, now bare. His indentation on the sofa, now smoothing out. Each discovery was a fresh stab of pain, a reminder of the intricate tapestry of their shared existence, now irrevocably torn. Echoes in a Hollow Room continued its successful run at the Chamberlain. The reviews were glowing. Critics praised its unflinching honesty, its psychological acuity, and Serafina Bellwether's luminous, heartbreaking performance. Elara read them with a strange detachment, as if they were about someone else's play, someone else's life. The accolades felt like salt in an open wound. Julian called, his voice warm with professional pride, gently urging her to attend a performance, to take a bow, to bask in the recognition. "I can't, Julian," she'd said, her voice thin. "Not yet." He didn't press, his perceptive nature likely intuiting that her reasons went beyond typical authorial shyness. "The offer stands, Elara. Whenever you're ready. Your words are touching so many people." Touching everyone but the one person they were truly about, she thought, a bitter irony. Chloe was her lifeline. She appeared with groceries, with comforting cups of tea, with a shoulder for Elara to weep on, or simply sat in companionable silence when words failed. "How are you, really?" Chloe asked one afternoon, finding Elara staring blankly at a blank page on her laptop screen. Elara sighed, a ragged sound. "I feel scoured. Empty. Like the play took everything out of me. And then Liam, he just confirmed it all. He's a fool, Elara. A coward." "Maybe," Elara said. "Or maybe I was the fool for not seeing it, for not wanting to see it, for writing it all down instead of saying it to his face." "You said it in the way you knew how," Chloe insisted gently. "And it was powerful. It was true. That's not foolish, that's brave in its own way." Brave, or a profound act of self-sabotage? Elara wasn't sure. The lines were so blurred. She received a short, stilted email from Liam a week after he left. It was an apology of sorts, filled with vague expressions of regret, of not knowing how things got so off track, of being lost. He mentioned Serafina only once, obliquely referring to a complicated situation. He didn't ask to see Elara. It felt more like a confession to ease his own conscience than a genuine attempt at reconciliation. Elara read it, deleted it, and felt a surprising lack of emotion, just a dull, heavy ache. One afternoon, a small, hand-delivered envelope arrived. It was from Serafina Bellwether. Elara's heart lurched. With trembling fingers, she opened it. The note was brief, written on elegant cream stationery. "Dear Miss Vance, I've only just learned the full truth about Echoes in a Hollow Room, its origins, its profound connection to you. Liam told me. I am beyond words. To say I am sorry for any pain I have caused, however unwittingly, feels inadequate. Your play is a masterpiece of honesty. Playing Clara has been the most challenging and rewarding experience of my career. I felt her so deeply. Now I understand why. I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I know if I deserve it. I only wanted to express my deepest admiration for your courage and your artistry, and my profound regret for my part in this painful situation. Sincerely, Serafina Bellwether." Elara read the note several times. Serafina's words seemed genuine, tinged with a remorse that felt real. There was no excuse-making, no deflection. It was a stark admission. Did Liam tell her out of guilt? Or had Serafina, with her intuitive grasp of Clara's character, pieced together the truth herself after Liam's shell-shocked reaction on opening night? Elara didn't know what to feel. Anger? Yes, a lingering ember of it. But also a strange sense of release. Serafina wasn't just a caricature, a villainess. She was a woman, an artist, caught in a messy human drama, just as Elara was. The note didn't absolve her, but it humanized her. And in a strange way, that lessened the sharp edges of Elara's pain. She didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. The autumn days grew shorter, colder. The vibrant foliage of Audenburg's parks turned brittle and brown, mirroring the desolation in Elara's heart. She stopped trying to write. The words felt trapped, choked by a grief too vast to articulate. She walked for hours, the rhythmic crunch of fallen leaves underfoot, a mournful soundtrack to her thoughts. She thought about Clara, her fictional alter ego. Clara, who had found her voice in the face of betrayal. Clara, who had walked away from her hollow room. Elara had written Clara's strength, but now she had to find her own. The process was slow, agonizing. Some days the weight of her sorrow was a physical burden, making it hard to breathe, to move. Other days a flicker of anger would surge, a righteous fury at Liam's deceit, at the casual cruelty of his choices. And sometimes, rarely at first, a tiny sliver of peace would emerge, a quiet understanding that she was free. free from the pretense, free from the slow emotional starvation of her marriage. Julian called again, his voice gentle. Elara, the play closes next week. The cast wants to do something special for the final performance. They asked if you'd consider just being there, in the audience, as yourself. Elara hesitated. The thought of returning to the Chamberlain, of watching her pain play out one last time, was daunting. But then a different thought emerged. Perhaps it was time. Perhaps she needed to see it. Not as a victim, but as the creator, as the survivor. Okay, Julian, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I'll be there. The night of the final performance of Echoes in a Hollow Room arrived cloaked in a soft, hesitant snowfall. Audenburg seemed hushed, introspective. Elara walked to the Chamberlain Theatre alone, the crisp air stinging her cheeks, feeling strangely calm. She wasn't backstage this time, not hiding in the wings. She took a seat in the center of the auditorium, a regular ticket holder, anonymous in the dimming light. Chloe had offered to come, but Elara had gently declined. This was something she needed to do by herself. As the house lights faded and the familiar opening notes of the play's subtle, melancholic score began, a tremor of anxiety ran through her. But as the curtain rose on the meticulously recreated set of Clara and Ben's apartment, something shifted within Elara. She was no longer just watching her pain. She was witnessing her art. She saw the craftsmanship in her words, the careful architecture of the narrative, the emotional honesty she had strived for. She saw Serafina Bellwether pour her soul into Clara, not as a caricature of Elara, but as a fully realized character, a woman grappling with universal themes of love, loss, and betrayal. And in Serafina's performance, stripped of the personal torment of opening night, Elara saw not a rival, but an artist honoring another artist's truth. There were still moments that made her breath catch, lines that pierced her with their remembered pain. But now there was a distance, a layer of artistic appreciation that hadn't been possible before. She could see the story for what it was. A story. Her story, yes, but also a story that resonated with the audience around her, judging by the rapt silence, the occasional sniffle, the knowing nods. During the pivotal confrontation scene in Act 2, the one that had shattered her on opening night, Elara watched with a new perspective. She saw Clara's strength, her resilience, her refusal to be silenced. And in that moment, Elara felt a flicker of that same strength within herself. She had survived. She had taken her deepest pain and transformed it into something meaningful, something that moved others. When the final curtain fell, the applause was deafening, more heartfelt, it seemed to Elara, than even on opening night. The cast took their bows, Serafina's eyes sweeping the audience, a genuine, radiant smile on her face. Then Julian stepped onto the stage. He held up a hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice resonating through the theater. "Tonight we have a very special person in the audience, the brilliant playwright who gifted us with Echoes in a Hollow Room, Miss Elara Vance." A spotlight found Elara. She flinched, momentarily blinded. The audience turned, their applause swelling again, this time directed at her. Her heart hammered. For a moment, she wanted to shrink, to disappear. But then she saw Chloe, who had snuck in after all, beaming at her from a few rows back, mouthing, "Stand up!" She saw the expectant faces of the cast on stage. She saw Julian, his smile encouraging. Slowly, Elara rose to her feet. The applause washed over her, a wave of warmth and appreciation. It was no longer a mocking sound, but a genuine acknowledgement of her work, of her voice. A small, tentative smile touched her lips. She gave a slight nod, a silent thank you. It was enough. After the theater emptied, Elara found Julian and the cast backstage. There were hugs, heartfelt thanks. Serafina approached her, her eyes shining. "Elara," she said softly, "thank you, for Clara, for everything." "Thank you, Serafina," Elara replied, meeting her gaze directly. "You gave her an extraordinary voice." There was no lingering animosity, no awkwardness. Just two artists acknowledging a shared, profound experience. The personal history remained, a scar, but the immediate space between them was filled with a measure of professional respect. Walking home through the softly falling snow, Elara felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. The city seemed softer, quieter under its white blanket. The hollow room within her still held echoes, yes, but they were fainter now, less tormenting. Other sounds were beginning to filter in, the quiet hum of her own resilience, the nascent whisper of new stories waiting to be told. The healing was far from over. There would be days of sadness, moments of acute loneliness, the lingering phantom limb of a lost love. But something fundamental had shifted. She had faced her pain, named it, transformed it, and in a way, transcended it through her art. She had reclaimed her narrative. Months later, spring arrived in Audenburg, tentative at first, then bursting forth in a riot of color and new life. Elara sat in her study, the window open to a gentle breeze, carrying the scent of hyacinths from her small window box. The brownstone apartment felt different now. It was hers. Quiet, yes, but not empty. It was filled with her books, her thoughts, the steady, rhythmic tap of her fingers on a new keyboard. She was writing again. Not about Liam, not directly about betrayal, but her voice was richer, deeper, imbued with a hard-won wisdom, a nuanced understanding of the human heart's capacity for both pain and resilience. She had learned that art could be a mirror, reflecting uncomfortable truths, but it could also be a window, offering glimpses of hope, of new beginnings. She had learned that her worth was not tied to a man's love or fidelity, but resided within her own spirit, her own creativity. She had learned that even the deepest wounds, with time and care, could begin to heal, leaving behind not just scars, but a testament to survival. Echoes in a Hollow Room had been a painful chapter, but it was not the end of her story. It was, perhaps, the fiery crucible that had forged a stronger, more authentic Elara Vance. The curtain had fallen on one act of her life, but a new scene was just beginning, and she was, at last, ready to write it, on her own terms, in her own voice. The room was no longer hollow. It was filled with the promise of her own making.